In this video, we're going to be talking to Parker Hayes with Ghost Town Outfitters, discussing some of the truth behind reselling vintage clothing. So let's not waste any more time and bring on Parker and see what he has to say. Welcome, Parker. Thank you.
Hey, how you guys doing? Good morning.
Yeah, so I just want to jump right into it. You know, there's probably a lot
Sure.
of mystery behind vintage clothing as we see the trend focusing and trending upwards when it comes to reselling vintage. But some people, you know, if they're just getting started, they might be lost. They might not know
Yeah,
how to tell if their pieces are vintage. So,
sure.
where do you see the trend of vintage clothing going, and how
Yeah,
can resellers capitalize on this trend?
absolutely. Man, it's a great question, and we were really stuck in a rut there for a while, where it was kind of like, well, if it's not a vintage T-shirt with like a band on it, or
Right.
whatever, or something say from the '60s or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we considered vintage for a long time. What I'm seeing now is that the vintage market is actually expanding quite a bit. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm noticing is that things that are being considered vintage, in my opinion, are not actually that old.
Yeah.
So, one
Right.
beautiful thing about that is that I'm seeing a lot of style kind of like stigma going away,
Mhm.
meaning
Mhm.
that there's more accessibility in the market in terms of what people want to wear. And
Yep.
so now, especially with younger kids, they're wearing stuff that's from the '60s, '70s, '80s,
Mhm.
'90s, 2000s, all at the same time. And so it's not just like
Yeah.
specifically like, oh, I wear '90s vintage.
Yeah.
Now it's
Right.
like the whole outfit top to bottom is different. So
Yeah.
so what I'm seeing as in terms of trends is that you're actually able to find things even from the early 2000s. And
Mhm.
even the other day, I sold something I never thought that I would sell, and I don't consider
Mhm.
it vintage, but it's like the West Coast Choppers. You remember West Coast Choppers with like
Mhm. Yeah.
Jesse James, like that old
Yeah.
TV show
Yep.
with the
Yeah.
motorcycles.
Yeah.
I had a long sleeve like waffle knit
Oh,
shirt,
nice.
and it
Mhm.
had the logos on the sleeves and on the
Yep.
chest with a motorcycle on the
Mhm.
back, and somebody
Mhm.
snapped it up right away, right away.
Nice. Nice.
So that's an interesting trend that I'm seeing, and I think
Mhm.
that if you have an eye for it, there's actually a lot more out there now.
Mhm.
So it's very exciting.
Yeah, so kinda like tapping into the nostalgia of, like, your
Yeah,
early days of growing up, and if you can kinda keen in on that, you may be ahead of the game, you know, with
that's
some of
right.
those types of things, because you're seeing rag houses pop up all over and just focusing on selling vintage bales to other resellers and wholesalers.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the trend has always been there, now you're just seeing it all over,
Hmm.
and I think that
Hmm.
this is just the kind of not the beginning, but the stage of where everyone's becoming more of aware when they go outsourcing to now maybe start
Definitely.
doing a little more research.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
mean, I just saw a video the other day. A pair of Levi's made in the 1800s sold for
Woo,
$170,000, and that got
absolutely.
everyone going into these caves and these mines to go
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
for Levi's.
That's right. We're
So
not
talk
going to
about
estate sales anymore, man. We're in the
no,
mines now.
yeah, we're in the mines looking for Levi's.
Yeah.
So talk about wow,
That's where the
game
money
changer.
is, baby. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so now we all are familiar with the thrift stores, garage sales, estate sales. But what are some of those alternative ways that maybe beginner resellers might not be aware of to maybe seek out more vintage pieces?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I think that yeah, obviously, the thrift shops are always good.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I'm actually finding a lot right now is, especially for some of this newer stuff, but
Yeah.
primarily, and I'll give the viewers a couple of tips. Things that were really hot in the Y2K era. So, for example, like BB. I don't know if you guys remember,
Yep.
that was like a mall brand.
Mhm.
This is extremely popular, and girls are looking specifically for BB
Yeah.
and like BCBG. Like these are
Mhm.
all
Yeah.
very common things, like in my
Mhm.
opinion. But
Yeah.
it's the styles are so specific to that era that that's what they're
Yeah.
looking for. So
Mhm.
that gives the possibility that even your friends, neighbors, people much nearer to you may
Yeah.
actually have some things that could be really valuable. Even,
Yeah.
chunky like
Yeah.
Skechers can be really
Yep.
popular if
They
they're from
are.
that era as well.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
I would say don't be ashamed to sort of like, not knock on your friends and family's doors and, see what they got in
Mhm.
their closets.
Yeah.
But also too, if you're looking around on, your Facebook Marketplace or something like
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
I think that people will include these things in lots a lot,
Yeah.
where they'll
Yeah.
they'll have a whole lot of like women's clothing or something like that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there'll be 10 pieces or something like that, and you might be able to get the whole lot for $50. And
Yeah.
sitting in that pile is, like, stuff from Hot Topic from the
Yeah.
early 2000s, like a
Mhm.
lot of the old, kind of old plaid pants and things like that.
Mhm.
Some of those are
Yep.
going for upwards of 120 and $30,
Yeah. I
and
know.
it's,
It's
you might
crazy.
you might pass it up. So I would say,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to, jump onto like a Facebook Marketplace, and when people have like lots of clothing, really sort of like
Mhm.
look through, what's sitting
Mhm.
there, and see if you can
Mhm.
see those tags kind of sticking out and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Or if
Yeah.
they have the specific names of the items like in the description, this is all, yeah, BCBG and, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
You might
Yeah.
have some good pieces for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, underrated is the Facebook Marketplace and the buy and sell groups on Facebook, going in there and just making it known, hey, I'm buying vintage toys, I'm buying
Yeah,
vintage this. You know, if no one if you're not doing that, no one knows what you're doing.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
and going into those groups is free. So that's just another
yeah,
strategy to
yeah.
add to your way of sourcing.
Yeah, and
What do
I do
you
that with a lot of my
Mhm.
Carhartt too. Just
Yeah.
for people to understand, is I just made a
Mhm.
pretty basic listing that just says like, hey, this is what I buy,
Yeah.
and you do have to be patient, because you get a lot of
Mhm.
people. I have people who will hit me up, and they'll be like, I have a Carhartt belt, and I'm like, thank you.
Yeah. I have a Carhartt sock. Are you
Yeah,
interested?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So you'll get a
That
lot of
the
that, but
yeah.
you'll find gold mines too. So
Yeah.
don't hesitate to make a, sort of a curated listing based
Mhm.
on what you're interested in, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an underrated one there too. What do you do to tell if you have a piece of vintage clothing? What are some things to look out for?
The my favorite one.
Mhm.
It says "Made in USA."
Mhm. Yeah.
Now that's
That's a pretty good
not
one. Yeah.
always. Yeah,
Mhm.
but by and large, if
Yeah.
you see something that has a paper or fabric tag hanging in it,
Mhm.
and,
Mhm.
as you've, I think, talked to some of your listeners about, when you go from sort of that more, like a coarse knitted tag into something that feels more like a paper tag, that
Mhm.
almost looks like it has typewriter text on it. You're moving
Mhm.
into a much older item when you get into
Yeah.
that sort of tagging.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I first thing that I would always do is look at your tags. If it has
Mhm.
a physical tag in it,
Yeah.
that it's probably at least early 2000s and back.
Mhm.
And then,
Mhm.
yeah, look at where it was made. A lot of times, manufacturing was either going to be, USA, but a lot of really, really great stuff was made in Mexico as well.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
it's not exclusive to the country of origin. But then that's when we
Mhm.
start looking into, obviously the quality of the goods. One of the things that
Mhm.
I frequently look at is zippers.
Yeah.
That's a
Okay.
really important thing to look at when
Mhm.
you have like a large zipper, and
Mhm.
it feels heavyweight. A lot of the times we
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
brands like Ideal, or
Mhm.
Scoville, to
Mhm.
name a couple of them. Those are generally indicative of very old manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
those are certainly a couple things to look at. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
fade and wash, can
Mm-hmm.
be really important to look at. And then, of course,
Mm-hmm.
the now more understood and generally talked about is the
Mm-hmm.
stitching itself. So,
Mm-hmm.
an older T-shirt is going to, along the cuff of the sleeve, is going to
Right.
have a single stitch instead of a double
Yep.
stitch.
Yep.
They moved into that chain, double stitching
Mm-hmm.
in kind of the
Mm-hmm.
mid 90s, and a
Right.
lot of manufacturers didn't pick up for a while.
Yeah.
So, that's and then of course, if it's on the sleeve but
Mm-hmm.
it's a double stitch along the bottom, we know that we have
Yeah.
a later production item.
Mm-hmm.
This is now
Mm-hmm.
because they were still producing those types of shirts into the late 90s and early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have it single stitch and single stitch
Yeah.
on both the
Yeah.
top and the bottom, then that is early production. So that's moving
Mm-hmm.
more closer towards the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So
Hmm.
those are certainly a couple of things
Yeah.
to look
Yep.
for sure. And then so
Yeah.
I'll give you one last one that you kind of want to be careful with is
Mm-hmm.
there are some good reproductions out there, and there's like a
Yeah.
brand called Shaka. There's a brand
Mm-hmm.
called Comfort Colors. They
Okay.
have very vintage looking tags
Oh.
that they're printing on,
Yeah.
but they're new. And one of
Right.
the ways that you can tell
Yep.
is well as a couple of things. Number one, if you look at the graphic that's on a shirt,
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
new stuff is more pixelated
Mm-hmm.
because the old stuff they were actually racking them up onto screen printing, and they're having to do
Yes.
multiple layers of paint, whereas now they're pretty much digital transfers that are put
Oh yeah.
onto the shirts. So if you look really
Yeah.
closely, a lot of times you can see pixelation in the
Mm-hmm.
letters, and then you kind of know right away, like, okay, this is modern, this is new.
Yeah, reproduction. Yeah, that's it's kind of like the big E with the Levi's
Yeah,
when they started bringing that back, and you're like, oh, great,
that's yeah, that's
thanks.
right. Yeah,
But yeah,
the Levi's premium is just like wah
mm-hmm,
wah wah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Country of origin, I've found like stuff that's Mexico,
Hmm.
even stuff even in Korea. Those can be, they started in the US and then they slowly went to Mexico because it was cheaper. And then they found out, oh, in Asia, those kinds of, it's made in like LL Bean or something brand. If you see like it's made in Korea or
Hmm.
Mexico, Hong Kong, don't be so quick to not rule that out as vintage. Maybe do a little
Yeah,
research on the tag, and you might have something that could be 20-year range around there. Um,
right,
it's
right.
it's crazy, yeah. So 20 years is kind of that cutoff, right? Is what we would typically call a vintage piece. So
Yeah,
now 2003 would be kind of that cutoff date.
totally.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
so so you're buying bales on the weekly. Have you come across any cool pieces in particular, vintage pieces that maybe we can be on the lookout for when we go out sourcing, or what have you found recently?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So previously I had mentioned some of that kind of like hot topic kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely be on the lookout for sort of anything that may have been sold via a hot topic like mall store in that era in the early
Yeah.
2000s.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, there was a brand called like Lip Service, and Lip
Mm-hmm.
Service did a lot of sort of like that kind of punk sort of
Hmm.
clothing, but
Yeah.
it was still made in the USA, and it was actually still fairly high quality.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that older even say Nightmare Before Christmas stuff. There's still a
Yeah.
lot of enthusiasm behind that.
There is. Yeah.
Another one
Yeah.
that's really surprising is that they released a lot of pretty unique like Alice in Wonderland
Huh.
memorabilia, and that was when
Uh-huh.
they kind of started almost moving towards a little bit of a creepier aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had a bunch of these shirts, that were like highly graphic, and everything was like kind of slightly distorted, and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might look at that and be like, oh, well, that's not that's not a vintage
Mm-hmm.
Alice in Wonderland, but it came from the early 2000s, and there's so much
Mm-hmm.
enthusiasm. Some of
Yeah.
just like the Cat in the Hat shirts, or not Cat in the Hat. I'm sorry, Cheshire Cat. That's what it was. Um,
Okay.
the with the big grin or whatever. Some of those will
Yeah.
sell for $200-300 for one
Yeah.
T-shirt. Just
Hmm.
yeah,
That, it's wild.
yeah, yeah.
um, yeah. So that's good. Good to be on the lookout. And it's crazy to think, yeah, just 20 years ago, what you
Hmm.
might thought was not vintage is now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
Can
hot
I can I
topic. Mm-hmm.
can I
Mm-hmm.
move the camera, Bo? Is that going to be? You guys could walk
Oh,
with
yeah,
me
yeah,
real
yeah, 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 yeah.
real quick
Yeah,
here.
definitely.
Um,
Let's take an intermission. Show
yeah,
you're
here.
in your shop,
I'm in
so
the
let's
shop right
see.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's see
so
kind of what you got. Mm-hmm.
I don't want to turn my camera too much, so you'll see right above my head here.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. There we go. That is like about a 1980s like Clyde Drexler era
Mm-hmm.
satin jacket, and I would definitely
Hmm.
suggest keeping your guys' eyes out for these from
Mm-hmm.
all eras, 90s pretty much on up. And
Mm-hmm.
it can be NFL, it can be MLB, it can be
Mm-hmm.
NBA. Doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. Just like sports apparel in general is really, really valuable.
Yeah.
Um, but this is also something that is findable on Facebook
Mm-hmm.
Marketplace a lot of the time, where people put out the satin jacket. They'll put it up for
Yeah.
$50, $80, but that jacket right there is worth at least 200 to 300. So,
Mm-hmm.
even if you were paying, potentially $100 for that
Right.
jacket, there's still
Yep.
meat on the bones if you wanted to try to flip it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is definitely something to be on the lookout for. Um,
And you found
now,
that in a bale?
yeah,
You
yeah, that came out of the bale, and actually here, just right
wow.
next to it. Let me see if I can get a little bit closer to see the plaid pants up
Mm-hmm.
there. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't get right there,
Yep.
right
Yep.
there. So
Yep.
that is Lip Service brand. So those actually came out of the bale recently as well.
Mm-hmm.
I did have this 1992 Garth Brooks two-side T-shirt come out as well.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't shy away from country music. I know
Oh,
everybody's always. The people look for like the grunge bands and stuff like that. I'm telling you, there's as
yeah.
much enthusiasm with old country
Yeah.
music as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so definitely be on the lookout for that kind of stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. If you are kind of local in Oregon, it's definitely worth the drive to head to Eugene and see what Parker has going on. I mean, it just keeps growing. More and more stuff, more variety to choose from. Whether if you
yeah,
want to wear it for personal or resell, I don't think you're gonna
hmm
find any better prices other than where he's at.
doing my best.
But that's very cool. Very cool. Um,
Yeah,
so you talked about some of the pieces you found recently. So now can you more deep dive into like some name brands like Carhartt, Ralph Lauren, Levi's? Now, what are some things that are going to make those kind of stick out as vintage? What are
yeah,
those brands doing to say like, "Oh man, this is a sometimes Ralph Lauren has a special embroidery or
yeah.
Carhartt has the made with pride stamp." So what are some like kind of accents to look out for within those brands?
Yeah, sure. So for me, right away, in looking at Carhartt, if you
Mm-hmm.
see a piece of Carhartt that's got a good fade on it, you know that
Mm-hmm.
you're probably in the right territory. You
Mm-hmm.
do definitely want to, flip those tags over and find that Union Made stamp on there.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, going back to some of the old Ralph Lauren stuff too,
Yeah.
they're so most of their old stuff is going to have that oval, or not oval, but long rectangular tag that actually spells out Polo Ralph Lauren on it. It's much longer. Again, if
Wow.
you're
Uh-huh.
if you're into a printed tag,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be vintage. But if you find Ralph Lauren, just with the classic pony on it, it's not super popular unless you can get it at the right price point. But once you get into anything that has any sort of patches, it's got
Mm-hmm.
any sort of crests of any variety on it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got something maybe on the sleeve. That's one thing that I would definitely say to be on the lookout for is anything on sleeves right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really popular. So
Mm-hmm.
those are definitely a couple to yeah, to keep your eyes open for. I mean, I personally love all, old vintage, like Western wear and
Yeah.
hunting apparel and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
if you find an old Western shirt, one of the
Mm-hmm.
first things that I would look for in that is, of course, see, does it have a tag? Is it made in
Yeah.
USA? And then the
Yeah.
next level is going to be the pocketing. So what you really want to find is kind of something like this, where this is what we would
Mm-hmm.
call like a flat pocket.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, a lot of times those are going to be significantly more sought
Mm-hmm.
after, and especially
Mm-hmm.
if that pocket is not only a flat pocket, but it goes into what's known as a sawtooth. So it'll
Yep.
it'll kind of have this toothing, pattern to it, and
Mm-hmm.
those, especially for Levi's, you don't even have to necessarily buy that old of a Levi's shirt. If it has a sawtooth pocket on it,
Right.
it's going to
Right.
have a way better sell-through rate
Yep.
than a
Mm-hmm.
standard shirt does. So
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely look for those.
Mm-hmm.
Another really good one, I think that the market has been a little dicey on them, but I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't shy away from Pendleton if you can get it at the right price,
Mm-hmm.
and assuming that it doesn't have a whole lot of moth holes in it. You have to be careful with that.
Mm-hmm.
But especially if you can find something that is what they call a shadow plaid. So a
Oh
shadow
yeah.
plaid
Uh-huh.
is instead of that really like tight blocking of the
Mm-hmm.
plaid, it
Mm-hmm.
looks like it sort of like is dissipating. It sort of
Mm-hmm.
all of the color sort of blends together, but you can still see
Mm-hmm.
that it's a plaid. So
Mm-hmm.
the shadow plaid is very, very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's a
best
good
case
tune.
scenario,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, if you go and you look around, and you want to do some research, look up shadow plaid.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, and then when you're looking at your tag, if it is, you got your Pendleton tag, what
Mm-hmm.
I typically look for is one that does not have the wool mark on it. So the wool mark is
Okay.
that sort of like, um, what do you call it? It's that the classic, when it says 100% wool, and then it has that
Mm-hmm.
little kind of spirally guy next to it. So if
Oh,
you if
uh-huh.
if you find a Pendleton shirt that doesn't
Yeah.
have the wool mark on it, it's pre
Mm-hmm.
1964,
Wow.
because they put
Yeah.
it on the tag in 64 and forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you
Mm-hmm.
know that you're working with a much, much older shirt. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would
Yeah.
definitely be on the lookout for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, you can make great money just selling Levi's, even modern or vintage.
Hmm.
But if you are picking up Levi's, you might want to double check the backside of the tag.
Yep.
Also, like you said with Ralph Lauren, don't be so quick to dismiss it. It might have some embroidery on the sleeves.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as well with Carhartt too. Don't be hesitant to flip the backside of the tag. A
Hmm.
lot of the times they put their date on the top left-hand corner on the back side of the care tag.
Right.
So you could check for that. Now, kind of just wrapping it up, do you see, kind of where vintage is headed? What kind of makes vintage valuable? Is it the current trend that you're seeing? Do you see it going away, or do you just see things keep on pressing towards, as the younger generation continues to wear 60s, 70s, and 80s clothing? Do you see it just taking up more of the marketplace?
Yeah, I really do. I think that what I'm seeing is a significant increase in just enthusiasm about
Mm-hmm.
clothing in general.
Yeah.
I'm also seeing, kind of like I was saying before, this trend towards nothing being off the plate. You could
Yeah.
mix all of these different things together
Mm-hmm.
and make them
Mm-hmm.
really cool and congruent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I'll see, some kids who will come through here, and they're
Yeah.
wearing actual vintage 60s bell bottoms
Mm-hmm.
and cowboy boots with a big cowboy buckle, but then they're wearing like a Raf Simons shirt which is
Yeah.
by all accounts like very modern streetwear
Yeah.
in sort of like the goth spectrum. So
Mm.
the mixtures of things that we're seeing are becoming a lot more diverse, and I think that
Yeah.
people are actually a lot less afraid to just
Mm-hmm.
not only be bold, but maybe even wear something that might not have been considered to be that cool, as long as it
Yeah.
goes along with what they're trying to create.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I would say sort of hone in on these different styles, like specific
Mm-hmm.
styles, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of see if you can kind of like curate a specific eye for
Mm-hmm.
that thing. So whether it be sort of like a festival style,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
with a lot of neon and fishnets and fur and all this kind of stuff, you can add festy into your title, and it can bring people who are looking for that stuff. So yeah, the way that or the direction that I see it going is just that we're adding more and more and more and more brands to
Mm-hmm.
what is considered vintage. And what I'm seeing is that people have such an appreciation for the artwork of it that
Mm-hmm.
they're not afraid to spend $5 on like an H&M shirt if they like the way that it looks, but then they're
Yeah.
also not afraid to spend $150 on the true vintage item to round out the whole outfit. So yeah, I think that the future is very bright, and because of COVID, I think that the market spiked really high, so it was sort of inaccessible there for a minute. You're
Yeah.
back. Sort of inaccessible there for a minute. I think
Mm-hmm.
that what we saw is prices going sky high. That's really
Yeah.
starting to sort of settle out a little bit now.
Mm-hmm.
Things are moving a little bit more. People are seeing the value in
Yeah.
liquidity and just letting it kind of keep moving,
Yeah.
and moving on to different things. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I think that that again, it's kind of like get rich in a niche. If
Mm-hmm.
if you see a thing and you're enthusiastic about it, I say go for it. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I would have never expected. If I could tell you how many times I've passed up on South Pole, Echo
Yeah.
Unlimited,
I know. It's crazy.
Fubu, stuff like that. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't touched this
Mm-hmm.
stuff in 10, 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just, you knew you had a dud. It was just going to sit
Yeah.
and not do
It's
anything. I can't keep it on the shelf right now. The minute that I bring
yeah.
any of these brands in, they're gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that is
Yep.
something to be on the lookout for, is sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
because baggy is back. So anything
Yep.
that's big,
Yeah.
relaxed,
Extreme.
oversized. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, so and that's another example where it's like now this guy wears the tight fits, and this guy wears the baggy fits, and this girl
Right.
wears the baggy pants, but like the super tight jacket, cropped jacket or
Mm-hmm.
something. It's all blown open now. So you guys have
Yeah.
a lot more room to roam around and discover sort of like
Literally. Yeah.
cool things, and it's not
Yeah.
so narrowly focused anymore.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So in with the generation kind of couple below me, Gen Z or
yeah,
whatever they call it, is the majority of the population now. As older people are retiring, and I'm getting older. The majority is now that younger generation, between 14 and 24 years old. That's a
yeah,
mass audience right there. That's going to be potential customers.
yeah.
So you can get ahead of that and really start to dial in your knowledge to really
Hmm.
refine it and refine it. And as you do that, then you're going to be able to be ahead of the Goodwills and the other thrift stores that are just now catching on to things like, oh, I'm going to price this North Face parka at $89. They're just now catching up with those common brands to
Yeah,
where it may take them years to be able to even figure out what's vintage and what's not.
yeah, that's right.
So it's very cool. I know you're on your way to picking up another bale today.
Yes, yes.
So I
Veil
don't
day
want to
today.
take up your time, but I do want people to know where they can find you as far as social media if they wanted to reach out? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can find me all day on Instagram. It's just Ghost Town Outfitters
Mm-hmm.
with periods in between the words.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the quickest way to get a hold of me. We're located at 1040 Tie-In. It's unit
Okay.
number 8 at the back of the building. So if you're in the neighborhood, we're just right off of West 11th. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would say any one of those. I'm really quick to respond generally. So just
Mm-hmm.
either come on into the shop between 12 and 8 o'clock Wednesday through
Mm-hmm.
Saturday, or just
Mm-hmm.
hit me up on Instagram at Ghost Town Outfitters.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate you. If you're catching this on the replay, go and follow Parker. He's a wealth of knowledge, even just to ask questions about
Yeah,
maybe some items that you found that were vintage. Um,
absolutely. I'm always here to
and,
help.
you know, yeah, consider subscribing for more reseller content. Smash the like button if you're getting value, and we'll catch you in the next one. Everyone have a blessed rest of the day. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.